This reading is from Rays of the Same Light by Swami Kriyananda, and this is from the Bhagavad Gita and is entitled, Life is a Dream. This passage is from the 14th chapter, the 24th and 25th stanzas. In these stanzas, Krishna describes the enlightened sage. Unaffected by outward joys and sorrows, or by praise and blame, secure in his divine nature, regarding with equal gaze a clod of mud, a stone, and a bar of gold, impartial toward all experiences, whether pleasant or unpleasant, firm-minded, untouched by either praise or blame, treating everyone alike, whether friend or foe, free from the delusion that in anything he does, he is the doer. Such a one has transcended nature's triune qualities. In this passage, we find expressed the positive side of austerity. Austerity, as presented here, doesn't mean fanaticism or exaggerated self-discipline. Rather, it signifies the calm realization that this universe is only a dream, and that nothing matters except God's love and the eternal joy of loving Him. Strenuous effort is required, certainly, especially in the early stages of the spiritual life, to reject all delusive attachments and desires. The devotee can avoid discouragement by reflecting on the bright side of renunciation, the soul's eventual freedom in God. In that divine state, he should remind himself, the soul will be untouched by delusion of any kind. Devastating storms of emotion may rage around him. He will remain ever at the storm's center, blissful, self-possessed. Renunciation without the thought of its higher purpose may set a person in conflict with himself. Or, again, one who embraces renunciation for its own sake may sink into that smug self-righteousness, which is more or less the only reward people get who follow the spiritual path joylessly. When a businessman reinvests some of his profits instead of spending them, it is in the hope of increasing his prosperity. And when a person refrains from replying cuttingly to a verbal assault from a friend, it is to preserve their friendship. Mature human beings realize that worthwhile goals can be achieved only if they invest energy toward them instead of squandering it. The same is true on the spiritual path. Renunciation represents an investment, the lesser interest in exchange for the greatest of all possible gains. People often remonstrate, when you go off and meditate, you are only avoiding life. This charge can be answered with a simple question. Do they themselves reproach high school graduates for going on to college instead of immediately seeking jobs? Certainly not. They know that a higher education will help them to find better jobs later on. The same is true for the spiritual search. The devotee who meditates daily gains increasing mental clarity. In this sense, indeed, he finds immediate benefits of from meditation, as well as long-term ones. His increasing inner clarity enables him to cope efficiently with the most mundane problems. Now, this is a parallel commentary on a passage from the Bible, and the subtitle is The Need for Austerity, and it is from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 10. Jesus says, "Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be they of his own household. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he that taketh not his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. In this important passage, we see Jesus placing strong emphasis on austerity. He doesn't equate austerity with harshness, but with unswerving dedication to God and to the divine search. It would be easy to take Jesus' words here literally as bellicose, which means sort of aggressive, warmongering. If, however, we consider them in the broader context of his life mission, we quickly see that he was speaking thus only to light a fire of divine courage in the hearts of devotees. In saying that he had come not to bring peace but a sword, he wasn't being a firebrand revolutionary. He meant sword symbolically, referring to the determination one needs to find God. Sword, in this sense, is an apt metaphor, for the devotee must be prepared to do battle in his confrontations with delusion. Sword is also a reference to the keen-edged power of discrimination, which severs the bonds of outward attachments. Jesus' reference to setting a son against his father and a daughter against her mother was not an attempt to destroy the family unit. It was simply an effort to inspire his disciples to sever their emotional attachment to everything and everyone. The power of cosmic delusion is conscious and tries to keep all men bound to matter. The satanic force holds before our imagination attractive scenes of family and home life. It suggests to the mind the pleasant normality that worldly people share. Others live in this way, it says. Why do you presume to be different? Indeed, even if one's relatives are worldly, one should always love them in God. A relative who shares one's love for God is, moreover, a great blessing. But if the only thing one's close relatives want is to wrap him in familial warmth, he then faces a choice between accepting the ego identity they represent or expanding his sense of kinship to embrace all mankind. Jesus himself made it clear that family and other relationships as such should be respected. Anyone, however, who opposes the devotee in his search for God must be met with firm resistance. This does not mean that one shouldn't inwardly bless everyone, friend and self-defined foe alike. This quote, "He that taketh not his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me." The spiritual path is not for armchair devotees. It is for spiritual warriors. The path is for those who would embrace death itself rather than abandon their divine search. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. The devotee in deep inner communion with God attains a state where he realizes that the next step is to offer his very ego into the ocean of bliss. Thus alone is it possible to attain union with God. It is a great challenge. The entire spiritual path is a training for this moment. All the service, the devotion, the discrimination, the humility, the chanting, the meditation. Whosoever draws back from this final offering makes the choice to maintain his separateness from God. Losing courage even at this late stage on the path, he loses the opportunity to attain infinite life, at least for this lifetime. The destiny of the soul is realizing the truth of Jesus' words, "I and my Father are one." Thus, through the Holy Scriptures, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. To those of you who are newer, Babaji gave Sri Yukteswarji the mission or the project to compare passages of the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, which he did in his book, The Holy Science. And so then Yoganandaji would also in his services compare the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, the similarities. And so then we at Ananda do the same. So that's why you will see us doing those things, comparing the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita that way. Yoganandaji had a very different perspective on the life of Christ as a yogi, and we usually explore that during the Christmas season and the Easter season. That's where we get more educated in getting to know all of our gurus through each celebration of each guru's life. So that's a little explanation of what's going on here. I wanted to just say that this reading is so important, both the one from the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. This whole concept of renunciation can be confusing for people, but before I jump into that, I just wanted to reread the passage from the Bhagavad Gita because it reminds me so much of Swamiji. Unaffected by outward joys and sorrows or by praise and blame, secure in his divine nature, regarding with equal gaze a clod of mud, a stone, and a bar of gold, impartial toward all experiences, whether pleasant or unpleasant, firm-minded, untouched by either praise or blame, treating everyone alike, whether friend or foe, free from the delusion that in anything he does, he is the doer, God. Such a one has transcended nature's triune qualities. This reminds me so much of Swamiji, and also the important thing he says in here, which is a theme throughout Ananda in general, which is that renunciation comes with an inner bliss, with an inner joy, not with, as Swamiji said, a joylessness. I wish I could find that. Swami said, "It's not one who embraces renunciation for its own sake may sink into that smug self-righteousness, which is more or less the only reward people get who follow the spiritual path joylessly." So you take this quote from the Bhagavad Gita, and it's very easy to view it either from a joyless point of view or from the inner joy point of view. And Swamiji showed us how to do this from the inner joy point of view. He called it samadhi affirming versus world negating, right? So world negating is that joylessness, and samadhi affirming is that renunciation with joy. So just in terms of regarding the equal gaze of clod of mud, a stone, and a bar of gold, the joyless person would look at everything as a clod of mud. So it's like, I am unmoved by anything in this room and anyone in this room. They may all be clods of mud for all I care. You know, it's a very joyless way to look at things. Instead, Swamiji would see the joy of God in everyone. And it doesn't matter if it's a clod of mud or a bar of gold, I feel the joy of God in all things. And then impartial toward all experiences, whether pleasant or unpleasant. So the joyless person would just view everything as unpleasant and just think, nothing touches me. I enjoy nothing. Pleasant or unpleasant, I enjoy nothing. And so in that way, everything is unpleasant. Let's see. Untouched by either praise or blame. It's a very good thing to contemplate for oneself, because you can always, the whole praise and blame thing is very interesting because you can tell almost immediately if you've responded to it. Because very often when there's praise, there's an inhalation and kind of a little bit of a backward head thing that kind of brings it to the ego. You know, Master said our ego is based here at the medulla. And so there can be some tension in the ego when that praise comes. And you can know immediately that there's been some kind of a effect physically that, justifies the fact that actually something happened inside with the ego that we may not necessarily want. But then also when there's blame, we, can take that in so strongly and feel so hurt by it. And it was very interesting to watch Swamiji with this because with blame, he would become rather logical, meaning, let me see, does this blame have any relevance to the current situation? Can I see any truth in this blame? If not, then it's probably just a reflection of the person speaking to me. So he was able to have that view, and yet also not have the need to strike back. So usually when we're blamed for things, we want to strike back and say, no, that didn't happen, and how could you do that, and now I want to punish you for doing that. And he didn't have that inside of himself. So, taking praise and blame it's a very important part of the spiritual path to understand how we react. Treating everyone alike, whether friend or foe. We watched him constantly when he was attacked by others. And I wouldn't say he was constantly attacked by others, but there were lots of instances where he would be attacked. And the reason why is when a lot of light is there, and if someone doesn't want the light, they want to snuff it out so that it's not there to remind them that they're not living in the light. So strong light can create strong reactions to it. And you might even see that in yourself now that you've been meditating more. Do some people kind of look at you like, who do you think you are, or something like that? They're sensing your light and feeling badly that they're not in the light. What hopefully you can do is embrace them in God's love, and they feel that acceptance whether they're living in a bright light or not. But with Swamiji, we saw even when people would attack him and try and bring him down, because that's what happens, is the higher up you get in your spiritual development, the more you'll find people want to drag you down. It just happens. And it's because of this issue of too much light or a lot of light. But Swamiji would not look at his foes as foes. He might say, well, that person is acting like a foe, they are trying to be my foe or something. But I refuse to cut them off. He really took his, I'm going to call it a role, but it wasn't a role. It was just who he was. He took who he was very seriously as a spiritual teacher, and not that he looked at himself even that way either. But he knew how important it was to never cut ties from his end. It was always important. If someone was going to cut a tie, well, it was from their end. And he always left the door open for people to come back and not renounce the spiritual path. Sometimes people just can't take it and they go away for a while. And rather than take that personally and judge others for doing that, instead he kept his heart open for that person. And if they ever came back, it was as if nothing happened. It was welcome back. That was it. So he showed us how to do that also. So someone who's living life joyously might treat everyone as a foe, but Swamiji treated everyone as a friend. And free from the delusion that in anything he does, God is the doer. That is definitely another very important part of the spiritual path we all need to practice, learning how to view our own actions or the fruits of our actions as God's fruits and not our own. And we can't fake that. We can't just say, oh, God is the doer, and not and think that just saying it is enough. We have to do the inner work that helps us to really perceive that God is the doer. It's really in the perception of things. So often creative ideas come from nowhere, seemingly. And we'll think, well, I came up with a great idea. And in actuality, Master said thoughts are universal. They're flowing around in the ether, and we might happen to intuit one of those thoughts that's already out there, or even better, ask God, how do you think this should be done? What creative idea could you give me to improve this situation, or whatever it may be? And then this creative idea comes, and it's like, wow, I couldn't have come up with that idea on my own. Thank you. Thank you, God. Thank you, Master, for giving me that thought. What a great idea. And it's not, I had a great idea. It's just, wow, what a great idea. And you can have that joy in that idea, sharing that joy of the idea with God. And we saw Swamiji talk so much about the creative process. He said when he wanted to write a piece of music, he would sometimes wake up from sleep with the whole song in his head. And he wasn't saying, oh, I had a great song. He would think, that song came to me from Master, from the Divine. And wow, I really love that song. Isn't this a great song? He would say that, isn't this a great song, or isn't this a great book? And some people would think, well, who's he to say, isn't this a great book? I mean, isn't that ego when you say that? But he never meant that. He always meant, isn't this a great thing that just happened here? And he never thought that I just did. It was like, isn't this a great thing that happened? And so in that way, he was just such an excellent example of this Bhagavad Gita quote. And I wanted to just start with that and move on to the thought of renunciation, because a lot of what I was just talking about is renouncing the ego aspect of things. But we want to do it in a natural way. The other thing is sometimes people confuse what renunciation actually means. And simply put, renunciation is putting God first. And so in that way, we are all renunciates on the spiritual path. When we decide to meditate, we're being a renunciate. We're choosing to spend time with God over something else we could be doing. When we choose to pray, when we're doing our healing prayers, again, we're being renunciates. We could be doing something else, but we're choosing to spend time with God in the form of prayer. When we spiritualize the work that we do, and we look at it as service, no matter what we're doing, whether we're doctors or engineers or computer technicians or whatever we are, you can spiritualize your job. You can feel as though you are doing whatever you're doing for God, to please God. and that the people you're working with, you're seeing them, the God inside of them, and you're serving God in them. And it sounds theoretical, but it's very possible to do. And it's really a first step in renunciation to be able to spiritualize what we do in our daily life. And see how the one thing I didn't say is, well, once you take your brahmacharya vows or once you take your swami vows, then you'll be a renunciate. It's not that at all. And Swamiji had different levels of renunciation. Maybe I shouldn't say levels, but different renunciation. He had, he had the brahmacharya, he had the swami, he had the, they're not tyagis, the tyagi, which is a householder who may wait until their children are 18 to take that vow. Householder couple. And then there's also just the vow of, what's the name of that vow? The Pilgrim Vow. And he saw all the vows as equal and only dependent on one's life circumstance. So the Pilgrim Vow is probably, it could be a couple that still has, it doesn't have to be a couple, but the Pilgrim Vow is someone whose life circumstance is that of a householder with taking care of children, and yet they want to vow and say, I give my life to God. They want that vow. The Tyagi vow is for a couple who want to take that vow together, but at this point, their children are 18 or above, and they don't have the same responsibility towards that child in the same way. You see, the child's a little bit more independent. And then the brahmacharya is someone who has chosen not to marry, and so, before Swami vow, you take the brahmacharya vow and try it out for a while and live that way. That is for that life circumstance, the person who chooses not to marry. The Swami vow has gone through the brahmacharya vow, and Master made it possible that married couples who choose can take that vow. And so anyway, Swamiji made these vows based on life circumstances, but they all have something in common, and that is renunciation. And again, renunciation is not that joyless pushing away, renouncing the world. Swamiji called that, world negating renunciation. He said, we're not in the age of that anymore. He said in the medieval times and a long time ago, we had to be in the world renouncing mode because the world was so tamasic and you couldn't escape it. Even going within, you could still be very much affected by what was going on. Things were much cruder. There's a lot of violence now, but things were more material-minded back then. And so to really get out of the material-mindedness, because it was a lower age, people had to go, the yogis had to go into caves, people had to go into monasteries, things like that, to get away from the worldly mindedness of life. But now we're in Dwapara Yuga, and we have that ability to escape worldly mindedness just by going within in meditation. It's not necessary anymore just to go hide in a cave to get away from it. And if that was what we were supposed to do, here we are back in this life. It didn't work, did it? Suppose we were in a cave in our last life and we thought, finally, I'm in the cave. I'm going to do all the things in the cave. I'm going to meditate all the time. I'm going to do everything I need to in the cave. Finally, in this cave, I will find God. And then we wake up in the next life. Something didn't go right, did it? And so then we're given this new mission of Kriya Yoga. Kriya Yoga as householders. And Kriya Yoga as householders who are renunciates. And so as I was saying, when we choose to meditate, we're doing a renunciation. When we are doing any action for God, it's a form of renunciation. So try not to have the word renunciate so far away from yourself. Because if you're a Kriya Yogi or if you're taking the classes here, most likely, Master said as soon as people want Kriya Yoga, they're very, very close to liberation. So even the desire to want it and to move forward towards it means that there's not a long way to go. On the other hand, the path to God is a steep and craggy mountaintop, and we'll have mud thrown at us in all different directions and all sorts of spiritual tests. Swamiji was tested till the very end. We're always tested, and that tests are good. Tests really help us see where we are on the spiritual path. We get very caught up in how the spiritual path should be and how we should be on the spiritual path and how we should be believing things and how not only that, how others should see us. And one of the things we get to know throughout life is that people never see us the way we want them to. So may as well just let that go. Now, there's a big deal about what do others think, and that can modify people's behavior a lot because they don't want to disappoint others. But Swamiji said, really, we need to touch the truth inside of a situation and follow that inner truth. Now, there's a way to follow the inner truth and not offend everybody outside. But, that's one of the tests that we have, is to learn how to do that. And so these tests, though, they're very important. Master called it being tested in the cold light of day, testing our spiritual principles in the cold light of day, because if we're not tested, then we just think, I'm just sailing along, and yes, I agree with that concept of loving everyone. That seems wonderful. I think I do that. I think I love everyone. And, that spiritual concept of being detached from things. Yeah, I don't think that I'm very attached to things, but it's only when people attack us and we therefore throw hate at them or when things are taken away and we realize how incensed we are that something was taken away and we really need it and want it, these tests tell us, that's where I am. Okay, I still have the ability to really dislike someone who makes me mad. I still have the ability to really be attached to some things. Okay, good to know. And then we can work on it. Then we can practice, as Swamiji said, when it's easy. So start practicing now, loving people unconditionally. Start practicing channeling divine love through ourselves to others when it's easy. And you find that through that practice of channeling divine love, then suddenly some big test comes up where someone normally would, whatever they did would make us not want to feel divine love. There's more of a sense of divine love there. There's more of an understanding. I see why they did that. Okay, I understand. I'm not happy about it, but I can see why they did it and where they're coming from. And it's not just feeling like an attack like it used to. So we grow. We become more able to handle these challenges because we have our center. The longer we meditate, the more we're able to take blizzards and storms and tornadoes and hurricanes outside in our life, and there's still that quiet inner voice, there's still that calmness that remains within that can handle those circumstances. And that's what we're going for. Meditation is inevitable spiritual progress. Inevitable. Now, we can't really know our spiritual progress except through how we react to things. Spiritual progress isn't, I meditate 3 hours a day, and so I have spiritual progress. It's not so easy. Spiritual progress is, wow, that really hard thing happened, and I didn't respond that poorly to it like I used to. And it's just a way of looking at things realistically, but without self-judgment and without judgment on other people as well. And trying to always tune in to God's love. Because, you know, there's that great story of Saint Teresa of Avila who had been through a lot of really hard tests, and she was kind of feeling grumbly about it. And she's known to be a great saint who felt great love for God. Christ would appear to her. So, you know, she was quite advanced. But then, you know, it was almost as though God had to also push the straw that broke the camel's back, which is, you know, she's in a storm and suddenly trying to cross a river on a horse and falls off, gets in the river. Is this the end? Am I going to die? God, how, this too? This too you're giving me? And then suddenly, poof, she's on the other side of the bank with Christ and says, you know, why? You did this to me? And Christ says, you know, this is how I treat all my friends. So, but you know, it's one thing to say, this is how I treat all my friends, versus this is how I treat all my friends. And with divine love, with divine joy, there was a little humor. She giggled. She knew what he meant. And he's saying, look, if you're going to be climbing those last few crags at the top of the mountain, you know, this is where we're getting into complex climbing, where, you know, you might only be able to grab a hold of the crag with one finger and try and pull yourself up with that one finger, and then you slip and catch yourself with another finger. It's difficult climbing. I used to be a rock climber when I was young. And, you know, you have to really, like, find your finger holds and things like that when you're climbing a difficult climb. So, if we can tune into divine joy soon enough, if we can tune into clinging to God soon enough on the spiritual path, then we begin to develop that inner joy that allows us to face all challenges. And as soon as we come upon a challenge and we say, okay, I can take this two ways. I can really go downhill with this and think, this is such a horrid thing that's happening and I hate it. Or I can say, okay, I'm going to go meditate. I'm going to go cling to God in this. I'm going to trust that the worldly reality going on here is not necessarily the real reality going on here. That it's a test that I'm supposed to overcome with an attitude given to me by the Guru. And we can all do that. I wanted to read a little bit just from a wonderful book that Swamiji wrote. First, I have to make sure, I'm pretty sure I have the quote still. Let's see. just do a little search. Okay, love perfected. Oh, I don't have it. Gosh, I thought I did. Okay. Sorry about the delay. Let's see, I really thought that I had. Okay, there's one other thing I can look up. Quote. Well, I do have it on my Kindle book. Let me see. Thank you for your patience. Okay. There it is. So, this book that Swamiji wrote, I highly recommend. It's called Love Perfected Life Divine. Love Perfected Life Divine. And it's fiction. So it's based on another book that he liked, but he basically spiritualized that book even more to make it more match our spiritual life. And it's a story of a woman who goes through spiritual tests. And the thing that I get a lot from this book is I think it really reflects Swamiji's experiences and is quite personal to things, to the thoughts he's had on the spiritual path and the things he's had to face. And, of course, one can never know exactly, but the way he writes is so personal, especially about the way this person gets persecuted. And so he says, okay. The woman writes, I had placed my book, The Secret of Life, on the table on re-entering my room. And Swamiji had written The Secret of Life in many different ways. Now I took it up again, and it fell open at the following passage. When once you possess the inestimable treasure of love, remember this, and it's talking about divine love, every effort will be made by the powers of darkness themselves to snatch it away from you. There is nothing that the world envies so much as a happy soul. Those who have been your dearest friends will turn against you, because you have a joy in which they do not share. They will join hands with your foes to drag you down from your height of paradise. The powers of the coarse and the commonplace will be arrayed against you. Shafts of disdain and ridicule will be hurled at your tenderest feelings. Venomous lies and cruel calumnies will be circulated concerning you in an attempt to draw you from your circle of light into a world of chaos and darkness. If you would stand firm, you must become strong enough to stand firm within the center of a whirlwind. If you would maintain the inner balance of your soul, you must preserve that balance even while in movement. The deathless essence of yourself must be kept under steady control like a well-disciplined army. Otherwise, The disintegrating forces set up by the maligned influence around you will attack not only your happiness, but your health and your strength, and will murder your inner peace. Love is the only glory of life. Love is the heart and pulse of all things. Love is a possession denied to earth's greatest conquerors. It is a talisman which opens all the secrets of nature. Love is a divinity whose power is limitless and whose benedictions bestow on life all beauty, all sweetness, all joy. Reading thus far, a light began to break in upon me. So anyway, I wanted to end with that quote. It's such a beautiful quote and so powerful, and comes from someone who is self-realized and is already on that craggy peak, looking down at us with Yoganandaji, holding a hand out to us, saying, I'm here, I'll pull you up to where I've been. And that was the mission of his life, was to always be reaching to help those of us up to that mountaintop. And when we look at that mountaintop, we don't need to feel intimidated. All we have to do is put one foot in front of the other, and we can do it. We all can do it. And that's the purpose of spiritual community, is to support each other in that project of finding God and loving God together. God bless you.